live. We're super stoked that all of you are joining us today from home or from school, all over the world. Thanks so much for joining us on Gaze Reef on Little Cayman. My name is Katie, and I'm the Education Manager here at CCMI, and today I'll be your topside host, alongside our underwater host and CCMI's Education Coordinator, Victoria. So she's underwater. Let's go ahead and say hello to her now.
Hello everybody joining us from around the world, and welcome to the incredible reefs here in Little Cayman. During today's episode, we want to hear from you guys at home. Ask us questions, share your comments, and we'll try to respond to as many as we can. To get started using the chat box, we want to know where you're joining from and who you're with.
That's right. We really want to hear from all of you joining us today. Where are you joining us from? Your name, your class, all of that. So keep engaging with us. Now, you may be able to see that Victoria is wearing some specialized scuba gear, which allows her to hear me and talk with all of you. And we're going to be discussing with you all today our topic, Finding Hope on Coral Reefs, where we're going to be sharing some of CCMI's long-term monitoring data and what that means for the health of our local coral reefs and the global threats they're under, and a little bit about what all of us can do to make sure they stay healthy for many years to come. Now, it's not just me and Victoria here. We're actually joined by a team of people from CCMI, both up here on the boat and underwater, and we're going to be checking in with them periodically throughout the episode. So let's go ahead and say hello to them now. Hi! Alright, now that you've met some other members of the team, let's go ahead and dive right in, shall we? Victoria, you're in front of a beautiful coral reef down there. Again, this is Gaze Reef. And these reefs are really beautiful, but they're also super important for our planet and us humans. Can you tell our students joining us today a bit why they're so important?
That's right, coral reefs are a vitally important ecosystem to everyone around the world. Despite covering less than 1% of the ocean floor, they're actually home to over a quarter of marine life. As you can see around me here, this reef is full of biodiversity.
Yeah, we're getting some great shots of some of the fish around you, big corals, so hopefully those things will stick around throughout the broadcast. And those are, while they're beautiful examples, to continue on what you said about the reef's importance, they're not only important to the ecosystem underwater and our global planet, but also crucially important to coastal communities like many that we have here in the Cayman Islands, as those reefs are providing food, they're beautiful, and they provide tourism for local jobs as well as just enjoyment.
These reefs are also the first line of defense for our coastal shorelines. They actually can absorb, these large structures can absorb up to 97% of a wave's strength. So these protect our coastlines here, which is super important.
And they're absorbing up to about 90% of that wave energy that might come, like you said. That's a staggering number. Now, for all of those reasons, these coral reefs are very important. Unfortunately, they are subject to quite a few threats. So can you tell us a couple of those threats, please, Victoria?
Yes, unfortunately, these reefs are subject to lots of threats. But our ocean's actually helping us out a lot to reduce the impacts of global warming. So the ocean has absorbed 90% of that warming that's occurred in recent decades due to greenhouse gases. This, though, makes our oceans around me here are getting warmer, and this is stressful for our corals on the reefs here. This can lead to increased coral diseases and coral bleaching, which ultimately leads to the death of our corals.
That's very true, and these reefs are also responsible for sequestering or holding in up to about 30% of the excess carbon dioxide that our human population is putting into the atmosphere, which makes it difficult for organisms like corals, which are putting down a calcium carbonate structure, to continue building on that over years to come. Now, these reefs are also facing some other challenges and issues, like our global plastic. And this is usually coming from single-use plastics and discarded commercial fishing nets. These can have really harmful effects on sea turtles, on sharks, on all the fishes that you students might see around Victoria. And even recently, scientists have discovered nanoplastics, or tiny plastic particles, being ingested by those corals when they're feeding. Now, there's also some things that might be happening due to overuse or abuse on these reefs. Things like people fishing out of season, or overfishing, or accidentally anchoring on the reef because maybe they're not aware of the marine park laws. Now, all of these threats that coral reefs are facing means that they're changing a lot, and that's what we're looking at when we're monitoring these reefs over a period of 20 or more years. Now, when we're looking at these changes, it's something that you students at home or at school can think about things in your own community changing. Maybe there's new buildings going up, maybe there's new roads being built, perhaps there's new schools because we have more people on our planet now than we ever had before. Those similar changes happening in your home environment are also happening down on the reef.
That's a really great comparison, and we have seen changes here on our reefs in Little Cayman. But as scientists, we need data to support our findings, so that's why here at CCMI, we go out every single year to the same survey sites using the same methodology, so we can say with confidence that we are seeing changes on our reef.
That's right, and that's called the scientific method. So we are following the scientific method by going out and using the same methodologies or measurement practices at the exact same sites year after year. And what that's telling us is these are our controls, or things that aren't changing throughout the research annually. And this allows us to really take out the data that is changing so that we can monitor that over time. This may be things like the different types of corals or fishes that we're seeing, could be the size of corals and fishes that we're seeing, or how their overall health is going on the reef. That's what we're looking to find out, looking at the overall health of those coral reef ecosystems. Now, in a bit, Victoria is going to demonstrate to you students some of those methodologies on the reef down there live, so that's going to be really exciting. And we want to show you some of these changes over time, but there's also some things to celebrate. There's some really good hope on our reefs as well. So, Victoria, are you seeing any of those positive signs or those hopeful signs on the reef around you now?
Yes, this reef is teeming with life. We have some black sturgeons over there, a type of triggerfish in the distance. There's also, if the camera could come a bit closer, there's a disco fish, which is always popular due to its vibrant spots.
Oh, love those.
I'm not sure if it's just hidden away as soon as the camera came out, but there was a yellow-tailed damselfish is the other name for the disco fish. We've also got some blue chromis on top of this healthy coral here, and I did see the disco fish dying back and forth again, but I think it's still hiding from the camera. So it's looking really healthy, our reef that we've got here. But what's our long-term data finding, Katie?
That's a good point. So going back to what we said, Victoria's observations of how beautiful that reef is are qualitative, which is observational data. But what we're looking for is quantitative data, or those raw numbers. And we do have some of that. So over the past 20 some odd years, our data is showing two big changes in the coral reef and those corals specifically. One being that we're finding the average size of corals is decreasing over time. The other being that we're seeing a shift from larger coral species to smaller coral species on the reef down there. So, Victoria, can you take a moment to demonstrate how we're collecting that data for our students now?
Yeah, I'd love to. So I've already laid out a 10-meter transect on the reef here, so that's the tape you can see out on the reef. And then I have my 1-meter stick, which has 10-centimeter intervals marked out onto it. So I will place the 1-meter stick along the transect and identify every single species that I see along the transect. We then measure the width, length, and height of each coral we see along the transect.
Awesome. That was a great demo. We love seeing that. And if any of you students or educators, teachers are joining us today and you're interested in learning more about that long-term monitoring method that we're using, Victoria's actually created an education worksheet in our resources, which is really highlighting those learning scientifically skills, which align with the Cayman Islands National Science Curriculum. So you can find those in our Education Resources page, which is just in the top left area, a button there. You can click on that, and it will take you to those education worksheets where everyone can feel like a marine biologist, just like our team of researchers here at CCMI. I think that, Victoria, that demonstration has actually inspired our first question of the day. So we have Nicholas joining us from Cayman Brac, who wants to know, if we're not supposed to touch the corals, then does that line and plastic square not harm them?
That's a really great question, Nicholas. So the line is really gently placed onto our reef, and it will only be there while we conduct the survey. It's a standardized method used throughout the world because it has minimal impact on our reefs. And that square you're talking about that you can see just over here.
Victoria, this is your producer, Beth. I'm just going to ask you to slow down a little bit when you're talking, because I know some of our viewers online are having a little bit of trouble hearing you.
Okay, thank you, producer Beth. So if we come closer here, we can see this little plastic square here is called a quadrat. So this is laid along the transect at different points and is a sample area of the reef. So we use this to estimate coral cover and macroalgae cover. So on this quadrat, about 20% of that quadrat is coral. And I'd say around 40% looks like it's that macroalgae that you can see. So that is what we use to estimate coral cover and algae cover on our reefs. We will take an average of all the quadrats at all the different sites.
Nice. I hope that you students are paying attention, because I believe that there's one page of that education resource worksheet that specifically asks you to analyze the percent cover of the coral and the macroalgae in your quadrat. So definitely that was a great thing to demonstrate, Victoria. Now, we've got people joining us from all over the world. We just want to give a few shout outs to some of you who have said hello. So we want to say hi to Fiona from Hawaii. She used to be our education specialist. Super stoked you're joining us today, Fiona. We've also got the students from Sir John A. Cumbers on Grand Cayman. They've come to visit us before at CCMI. So hello, everyone joining from there. And we've got a great question from Juanita. Juanita wants to know, how does our research team know which corals are which?
Hi, Juanita. That's a really great question. It actually takes a lot of time for our researchers to learn all the different species here that we have. There's over 50 stony coral species here in the Cayman Islands. So it does take a while, as some of them can look quite similar. But it's really fun learning coral species. So I highly recommend everyone at home I'll point out a few, try and get a favorite coral species. Really great question.
Yeah, that is. Thank you, Juanita. And Mira wants to know if we ever see any sea urchins. So, Victoria, have you seen any sea urchins down there around you yet?
I haven't seen any yet, but I will keep an eye out as we go through today's episode. But I do love seeing sea urchins. We get a lot more at night time. They come out and more on top of the reef. During the day, they're kind of hiding away. So we'll keep an eye out.
Sounds good. And you students at home, also keep your eyes out for anything that you want to see on the reef. Fishes, urchins, corals, algae, maybe an occasional shark or turtle if we're lucky. So make sure you let us know. Now, Anthony wants to know, he's a little concerned that maybe it might be cold down there, wants to know, what's the water temperature and does it change very much?
It's not too cold. I've got a nice wetsuit on to keep me nice and warm. But the water's pretty warm here. It is the colder part of the year, so definitely worth a little wetsuit. But thank you for your concern.
All right, keep those questions coming. Give us some shout outs. Let us know if you're joining us. And while we're waiting to hear from more of you joining us today from all over the world, Victoria, I think you were about to tell us a little bit more about the coral data from our long-term monitoring efforts.
Yes, so with over 20 years of doing these surveys on our reefs, we've had some interesting findings. We're finding that corals on our reef are starting to get smaller, so that width, length and height measurement that I was showing you that we use the meter stick for, we're finding all of these are getting smaller on our reefs. We're also seeing a shift in the species that we're seeing dominating our reefs. So we used to have more of the massive boulder species, and now we're starting to see more of the smaller species being the most dominate on our reefs. Another thing we're finding on our surveys is our coral cover. So we're finding that coral cover has remained constant here in Little Cayman, and this is a good sign because in the wider Caribbean, we're seeing a decline in coral cover of up to 80% in the last 30 years, whereas here in Little Cayman, it stayed around 22%. It's gone up and down a little bit, but it's a pretty constant coral cover.
Wow, 80% is a staggering number. I'm super glad to hear that ours is remaining constant around 22%. It's another reason to give us hope for our local Little Cayman reef. We've got a few more shout-outs that I want to deliver to you, Victoria. We've got Kim and Stacy joining us from Georgia.
Hi, Kim and Stacy.
We've got Laura from Puerto Vallarta in Mexico. Hey, Laura.
Hey, Laura.
She was doing some research with us earlier this year, so great that you could join us. And we've got Tony and Sue Mann from Cornwall and Pam from the UK. We've got a lot of you guys joining. This is great. Mrs. Prius, third grade class from Beacon Tree Elementary School in Michigan. Wow.
Oh, nice.
Whole class. Love it. And of course, Joanna Clark, year 5 at CIS.
Hi, CIS.
Hi, everyone. They're coming to visit us soon. We're really happy to see them on Little Cayman. And we've got some questions. So, Victoria, Nick Ebanks on Cayman Brack wants to know, what does it mean for the environment that corals are getting smaller?
That's a really great question, Nick. So, what this means is that over time, with the threats that reefs are currently facing, if we're seeing a shift to smaller species, over time our reefs are going to get smaller, weaker and flatter. And this is an area for concern because if we have smaller, weaker reefs, it means they will provide less protection for our shorelines. It also means there will be less of a complex habitat structure, and therefore the reef will support less biodiversity overall. So this is really concerning for us, but great question, Nick.
Yeah, so I think in that same vein, Victoria, do you have any examples of those smaller species of coral on the reef around you, or even the larger ones?
Yes, so if the camera person just comes with and we swim a bit closer to the reef here, we've got lots of examples, which is really good.
Excellent. And as Victoria is pointing out those examples, you students might hear her talking about the names. Think about how the common names have really outlined the description of those coral. That helps us to remember the different kinds that we asked about earlier.
So here we have some of the lettuce coral. So this has got a really distinctive lettuce pattern to it. And just next to it we then also have the mustard hill coral. So these are the both really small corals that we see very often on our reefs. The lettuce coral is actually the dominant coral on our reefs from our findings.
They still look really beautiful though.
And if we swim a little bit further over here, we have the incredible mountainous star coral. So this is the larger coral that we're seeing less of on our reefs. And it is a really impressive structure, so it does look like a mountain, and it creates a great habitat for fish as well, as it kind of has a skirt flaring out beneath it, and that creates a great habitat for fish to hide in there. There's also some more of the lettuce coral and the mustard hill coral here as well, just for comparison of how small these species tend to be and how large the mountainous coral is in the background behind it.
Yeah, we can really see how large that coral is, especially when you're right in front of it. So we can see the comparison between those smaller species and that bigger species. We've got a few more shout outs to Cayman Learning Center and Cayman Learning School have joined us. So hi guys, thanks for coming and joining us today. And we have another question. So Victoria Zane wants to know, what exactly is coral?
That is a really great question, Zane, and I'm super glad you asked that because I love talking about what coral is. So some people can get confused because it is a bit weird looking. It's kind of confusing as to what it is. But it's actually an animal. So coral is made up of thousands of polyps. If we zoom in really close to one of the corals, we've got a great star coral here, so this is a great example. The great star coral has really large polyps to it. And so this is an animal, so it feeds, it comes out with tentacles at night time and feeds. But it also has a plant that lives within the coral's tissue, and this is called zooxanthellae. And this actually provides the coral with up to 90% of its food. The corals also create their own skeleton just like humans. So they create a calcium carbonate skeleton, and this is like a rock, so that's why they look the way they do. But they are actually an animal. Really great question.
Yeah, that can be a tricky one, but it's always good to know the basis of what's making up that coral reef all around you. And it's many of those stony corals building up on top of each other over time until we get that big reef that you see behind Victoria. So thanks, Dane, for asking that. We'd also like to thank Nikki and the Cayman Islands Airport Authority for joining us. So hi, McCoys, Nikki, and the whole family. I'm sure you're all joining us today. Thanks for being here. Victoria, I think the next thing we were going to talk about besides that change from larger species dominating the reef to smaller species of coral or smaller kinds of coral was that interaction between coral and algae. So you spoke about the algae living in the coral, but what about macroalgae and coral?
Yeah, so if we get really close to the reef, you can see that next to this large mustard hill, actually have the macroalgae growing right next to it. So just here is that macroalgae we're talking about. And the macroalgae grows really quickly. It can grow 1 to 2 centimeters a month. Whereas corals are a lot slower growing. They grow around 1 to 2 centimeters a year. And so this can lead to that macroalgae overgrowing our corals. Because these two things are always in competition with each other. So in a healthy, balanced ecosystem, we should have twice as much coral as macroalgae. But if we lose our key herbivores off our reefs, we end up with an increase in macroalgae. As the herbivores are key to grazing on that macroalgae, a bit like cows grazing in a field. They munch on the macroalgae and keep it nice and low so our corals have space and room to grow. So in a healthy, balanced ecosystem, these two will be in a good position. But when we lose our herbivorous species, we end up with an increase in macroalgae causing a decrease in our corals. So that's why in our surveys we always make sure we compare coral cover to macroalgae cover.
Wow, thanks for expounding upon that for everyone joining us today, Victoria. I think that's really going to help you students with those working scientifically skills, and especially with those worksheets. Now, if that interaction that Victoria just highlighted, the symbiotic relationship between the stony coral and its zooxanthellae, as well as the competition interaction between coral and macroalgae, we've created a mini module on that, which is also available in our education resources. So again, clicking on that upper left-hand corner, you can learn more all about that mutualistic symbiotic relationship. Now, we've had a question from somebody joining us who must be pretty aware of what's happening in the Caribbean, and they want to know, are we seeing stony coral tissue loss disease on the reefs here in Little Cayman? Victoria?
That's a really great question. It shows you know and care about our reefs. So, we're pretty fortunate here in Little Cayman. There has been no signs of stony coral tissue loss disease. But unfortunately, it has been found in Grand Cayman and has now gone around the whole of the island. This is concerning, as this disease is really detrimental to our reefs. It affects a lot of different species and has a really high mortality rate. Some studies say 60 to 100% of corals that get the disease die. And I think in Grand Cayman, the DOE said that every coral that got infected that they recorded that wasn't treated died. So it is really concerning. But no signs of it on our reefs here. They all look really healthy, which is awesome. Great question.
Yeah, I'm not sure who asked that, but thank you very much to whoever did for bringing that up. One way that anybody traveling to the sister islands here in Cayman, if you're coming from Grand Cayman or the States or anywhere else that may have stony coral tissue loss disease, we ask that you please disinfect your gear before you go for your first dive in the sister islands. And you can find more information on that on the Cayman Islands Department of Environment website, how to properly disinfect everything, including your boat bilges. So thanks again for bringing that up. I think the next thing we wanted to talk about, well, first and foremost, let's check in with you and the underwater team, Victoria. How's everyone doing down there?
Hi there, could we get Georgie to come down? No?
We can have Alex come down, yes.
The camera person's a little low on air.
Okay, great. We will send Alex in now to help out.
No worries. Thanks for letting us know. Now, while we're waiting for the next member of our team to hop in and help make sure everything's running smoothly, I think, Victoria, we just want to talk a bit about what effect that shift has on the overall coral ecosystem and our planet and humans as a whole. So we just want to remember that, as Victoria mentioned earlier, corals are very slow-growing organisms. 1 to 2 centimeters a year or 8 to 10 centimeters a year depending on the species. And remember, they're putting down that calcium carbonate skeleton, like our own skeleton, on top of each other year after year over thousands of years to form that reef. Now, what that means is that these massive structures not only take a long time to form, but they're not able to respond as quickly as other organisms on the reef might be able to respond to stressors, and unfortunately we are seeing them break down over time. Victoria, can you talk a little bit to our students about this breakdown and what's happening on the reef? I think you might have touched on it earlier, actually, a little.
Yeah, so I think we answered that earlier with one of the students' questions, that if we get weaker, smaller reefs, that they would provide less protection for our coastlines and would also provide less of a complex habitat, so cause reduced biodiversity overall.
That's right. I think that was Nick on Cayman Brack. Hi, Nick. Great question. Asking about the change from the larger coral species to the smaller coral species. And that is known as reef flattening, because it means, as Victoria said, those big branching corals are starting to get flatter. So we are seeing that on the reef. However, we have some reasons for hope, and that's why we're all here today, right, is to hear about our long-term research efforts and to hear some positive environmental news as well. So we're seeing some fantastic increases in fish abundance, fish biomass, and species richness amongst our fishes, which is great news. Victoria, can you share a bit more about that?
Yeah, I'd love to. So you used a lot of technical terms there, so for our buddies at home, I'll just break those terms down.
Great.
So fish abundance means the number of fish we're seeing on our reef. So here we have lots of fish, which means high abundance. You then said fish biomass, and this is referring to the size of the fish we're seeing on the reef. So an increased biomass means we're seeing more bigger fish, and this is a really good sign for our reefs. If our reefs have larger fish, that means that there is a healthy ecosystem that can support larger fish. It also means our fish are growing up to be adults, so that's showing our marine protected areas are working really well. Species richness is the number of different types of species that we're seeing. So we're seeing a lot of different species, which is really good. So here we've got a yellow-tailed damselfish, some black sturgeons, some barrettfish, some blue chromis as well, bicoloured damselfish, the classic sergeant major swimming by there as well. So reefs are looking really healthy down here.
It's looking beautiful, Victoria, and we're just going to take a moment to apologize to all of you students and everyone joining us today. It's a little windy up here, and it's a live broadcast, so we apologize for all the moving around and the wave action. So hope nobody's getting seasick as you're our virtual dive buddies today. Victoria, we've got another question. This is from Issy, and she wants to know if we're seeing many sea turtles here in Little Cayman.
That's a great question. We do get a lot of turtles here in the Cayman Islands, nesting on our beaches, but I haven't seen any around me today. I'll just have a quick check. We actually get 3 different species here in the Cayman Islands, the hawksbill, the greens, and the loggerhead as well.
That's right, and we're coming up on nesting season, so we're starting to see more of those loggerheads on our dives and snorkels. So again, you dive buddies joining us from home or at school, make sure you keep your eyes out on that reef around Victoria, or even behind me, you might see a turtle pop its head up. You never know. Okay, now we have some positive news that you've just highlighted as far as the fish abundance, the fish biodiversity, and the species richness. All really incredible data that we're so happy to share with everyone. We want to further dissect that data to talk about some particular high points that have happened. And one thing we see when we take that data apart is after 2016, we're seeing big increases in all of those things. And we think that's because in 2016, the Cayman Islands Department of Environment put in enhanced protection efforts targeting just one species, that Nassau grouper. Now, the Nassau grouper is both an important mesopredator or apex predator here on our local reefs. It's also a culturally significant fish to the people of the Cayman Islands overall. So by putting in enhanced protections for their spawning grounds that we have here on the west end of Little Cayman, we have seen an overflow effect benefiting the entire coral reef ecosystem. So we've seen fish abundance, fish biomass, and species richness all increase even more after those enhanced protection were put in place, which is sweet. Now, if we dissect that data even further, we can see in 2020 and in 2021, we were able to see an even higher spike. And now we suspect this is due to the reduction of human activity on our reefs in the Cayman Islands due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, this is all really great, and the only way that we'll be able to continue seeing these positive trends into the future is what?
By continuing to go out every single year, year after year, using the same methodologies and analyzing our results.
Exactly. So following that scientific method, having those controls in place, and really looking for those changes on the reef, both the challenging ones that might not give us so much hope, and then these positive ones as well. So probably all of you today are super stoked to hear that we're seeing more fishes, that we're seeing bigger fishes, and that we're seeing many different types of fishes. But Victoria, can you share with our students joining us today, what does that mean for the rest of the coral reef ecosystem overall?
So on the coral reef ecosystem, we have a lot of different jobs that are done by different species. So we have our predators, our herbivores, and our cleaner fish as well. So I'm trying to keep an eye out right now, as I did keep seeing a stoplight parrotfish going by. But I think he's disappeared right now. So the stoplight parrotfish is a key herbivorous fish species on our reefs. I think our camera person is just swapping over, so sorry the camera's a bit far away. But the stoplight parrotfish is a key herbivorous fish species on our reef. It's feeding on that macroalgae on our reefs. And so this is a really important job to keep our reef ecosystem really well balanced.
Great. And Victoria, I just want to highlight for our students that those parrotfish are the parrotfish that we've highlighted, again, in those education resource pages. We're looking at those different phases over time: juvenile, intermediate or teenager fish, and then terminal phase or adult. So when Victoria is pointing those out on the reef, once the camera is able to get a bit closer, she'll be able to highlight some of those, what we call key distinguishing characteristics, which shows us the differences in those life stages. So keep your eye out for that, and then make sure that you can apply it to your working scientifically skills on your worksheet. So sorry to interrupt, Victoria. We just wanted to make sure that we're making everybody focus on those things that can help to really solidify these lessons they're learning today.
No, that's great. Thank you, Katie. My last thing to say about the parrotfish was that they're also famous for another reason. So our parrotfish are actually what makes the Cayman Islands kind of famous. It's for parrotfish poop.
It's true. One of those funny things in nature is that parrotfish poop, another word for it, many of you may have seen in our poll and know the answer. It's sand. And in the Cayman Islands, we have the famous 7 Mile Beach, which is composed of a lot of parrotfish poop. Also some bits of old coral and crustose coralline algae, and also bits of shells, but a lot of it is that parrotfish poop. So great job on all of you who knew that. We also just want to take a moment to highlight our sponsor, the Edmund F. and Virginia B. Ball Foundation. They are responsible for all of this being put together. They've donated so much to make this project happen from its inception in 2016. So we're really appreciative of that, as well as to Miss Nancy, who's currently on Island Little Cayman. Hope you're joining us today, Nancy.
Hi, Nancy.
And just shout out to Terry. Terry knew about the sand and parrotfish poop. So thanks for reinforcing that with us, Terry. So everyone joining us, keep those engagements coming. We want to hear more questions from you. Give us more shout outs if you want Victoria to say hello from Gaze Reef here in Little Cayman. And we have another question, Victoria. Rachel on Grand Cayman wants to know that you highlighted earlier some of those fish have different jobs on the reef. And those bigger fish, are they eating the smaller fishes? And if so, does that mean that the bigger fish are actually bad for coral reef health?
That's a really great question. Some of the larger fish will eat the smaller fish. You have other large fish that will still munch on the algae. But it's actually a good sign for our reefs. If our reef ecosystem can support those larger fish, that shows that we have a really healthy reef environment. It's also showing that our fish are growing up and making it to adulthood, which is another good sign. The Nassau grouper that you talked about earlier, which we'll have a look to see if we can see one. They're a really key species here in the Cayman Islands and a great conservation success story. So the Nassau grouper takes 5 to 7 years to reach the point where it can reproduce. So we definitely want to see them getting to a good size and being a big healthy fish on our reefs.
We definitely do, and we see quite a few of them, which we're really happy to see. Now, we're starting to approach the end of today's live broadcast, so we just want to take a moment to highlight some of the key messages we want all of you joining us today to go home with. We've talked about CCMI's long-term monitoring data and what this means for the current state of health on our coral reefs and how that reflects where the reefs are globally and their threats, and that corals are pretty vulnerable as they're slow growing and don't necessarily respond to those stressors as easily as maybe some other species on the reef do. Now, there is some positivity here. We heard about the increase in fish abundance, biomass, and species richness, and we want to know what all of you are doing. So we don't have very much time, but with these last few moments, let us know in our chat box how each of you are trying to help minimize your carbon footprint and help keep these reefs around Victoria beautiful and healthy for many years to come. These can be small changes or big lifestyle changes. We want to hear from you. Victoria, can you give us one example to maybe inspire these students with something that you've done to help our coral reefs?
So when I was actually at school, me and my best friend at the time, who's still my best friend watching today, so hi Hannah, we actually wrote a letter to our head teacher and asked to get a little garden area for our school so we could grow local fruits and vegetables for our canteen. And that's still being used today, which is really awesome. So we learned today, oh, there's a parrotfish right behind the camera person.
Nice. And we have one last question, I think, from Josh, who wants to know, what is the rarest coral? Maybe not in the world, but how about here in Little Cayman, Victoria?
That's a really great question, and it's one of my favorite corals. It's the pillar coral species. It's these giant pillars that come up from the ground, and they're huge. There's actually a pillar coral colony on Little Cayman that is bigger than me. It's really massive with all these giant pillars. So that is a critically endangered species of coral, and unfortunately it's really badly impacted by stony coral tissue loss disease.
It is. So all of these ways that you're starting to chat with us now about the things that you're doing to minimize your carbon footprint and help keep these reefs healthy for many years to come can directly help a critically endangered species like the pillar coral to be around for many more years. We also have a few more questions coming in, and we'll try to answer those after the episode. I think we need to bring it back now, so we just want to make sure that all of you know that every little thing that you do helps make a big difference. It's not just up to us working at CCMI, marine biologists, educators, conservationists. It's up to everyone who lives on this planet for all of us to do our bit. So we've got a couple more. Buddy from CIS says that he's vegan, so he's minimizing his carbon footprint by choosing to have a plant-based diet. Great work, buddy. We love that. We've also got plenty of others joining us who are saying that they reuse their water bottles and they try to use single-use plastic less. So things like single-use plastic bags, toothbrushes, and volunteering with Plastic-Free Cayman on Grand Cayman and in the Cayman Islands as well. So many different initiatives throughout the world that are helping to minimize their plastic use. So well done to all of you. Keep up the good work. Our reefs appreciate it, and every little bit does matter. So make sure you keep doing that. Victoria, I think we need to get ready to sign off. Do you have anything else that you'd like to say to our students joining us today?
I'd just like to thank everyone for joining us today and for all your fantastic questions. I also love hearing everything people are trying to do to help the environment. Maybe a small step, but if everyone makes these small steps, it can make a huge difference. So thank you guys, and I'll see you on the next dive.
Our next dive is going to be on Thursday, May 11th. Our Reefs Go Live will be focused on adaptations on coral reefs. So be sure to fill out our post-program survey, take our pledge, and we look forward to seeing you then. Thanks, everyone.
Bye!